What is up, you guys? Glitchiz here, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm bringing you, just in time for the holidays, my new Ultimate Warrior build for the Wake of the Water update. It's the final one that I'm going to be making for you guys, and put a lot of time into testing pretty much every single weapon and piece of armor combination that you could think of, and it was probably the toughest out of the 3 builds because there's just so many options to choose from. But I've come up with a very unique and powerful combo that I haven't seen anyone else using yet, so I'm really excited to show it off to you guys. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So starting off with the armor, one quick thing that I want to mention is when you're building a warrior build in terms of math and the kind of like theory crafting behind it, there's really 3 main things that you want to take into consideration. You want to be tanky and have good survivability, so our core stats for things like stamina and base health have to be really good. You also want to take into consideration the damage types and the weapons you're going to be using, because there's a lot to choose from, and there's a lot of different types of weapons, whether it be one hand, two hand, things like that. And last but not least is you want to focus on your armor and your resistances. That is very important on a warrior because you're going to be in close quarters combat a lot more often. So I took all of those things into consideration, and they drove the decisions that I made for the specific pieces that we chose. So for the legs, best in slot in my opinion are going to be the Drakian boots. Plus 12 stamina regeneration, minus 0.2 second stamina regeneration delay, and plus 6% damage against Drak. Another really good option is going to be the Quetzal Hunter shoes. Has a little bit more stamina regeneration and a faster delay. The only reason why I like the Drakian boots better, even though the regeneration stamina wise is a little bit less, is 1, because you get that damage boost, but 2, if we look at the armor and resistances, compared to the default set, we have 80 total points of resistance, equal across the board, and no bonus modifiers. But on the Drakian boots, we have 84, so 4 more base points of resistance, and we get an additional 21 cutting resistance and 21 fire resistance. And for those of you that don't know how the resistances and armor works, is basically for every point of armor or point of resistance you have, it just flat out blocks a point of that type of damage from getting hit to your character. So not only is it good to mix and match certain pieces of armor from different classes, we'll be using several hunter pieces on this build instead of warrior pieces. The reason I do that is because the hunter pieces in particular always have a higher max number of resistance points than the warrior pieces do. So even though you might get little lower stats, you're actually making up for it because of the resistances and the armor that you're getting. Plus the Drakian boots, like I said, the cutting and fire, almost all ranged enemies in the game, especially like the scavengers, they have fire-based like explosive attacks, and most of the close quarters melee enemies you're going to be fighting use cutting attacks, so really good resistances there, and the amount that you're going to be mitigating damage-wise from the resistances is almost the same as what you'd be making up for with a different type of just regular perk on the piece of armor, so that's why I'm running that. Moving on to the pants, another piece of hunter armor, because this has really high physical and magical resistances and armor as well, is going to be the Quetzal Hunter pants. 22 flat stamina and 12% sprint speed. We're going to be in close quarters, like I said, a lot, so any movement abilities to increase those type of stats is going to be very beneficial. Moving on to the gloves, this one was interesting. The best in slot, in my opinion, if we're going for raw max DPS, min-maxed, is going to be the greatsword gauntlets. The 21% greatsword damage, you just can't beat it. A good runner-up is going to be the Sunpiercer gloves. That gives you 18% two-handed melee damage. So if you didn't want to run the soaked status type of style that we're going with the particular weapon we're using, this is a decent option. You're just not going to have as high of DPS. I've seen a lot of other people building their warriors with this piece in particular, but once you see the combination of greatsword that we're using, it's literally broken. You do insane amounts of damage. I'm talking like 8,000 damage crits that you can do with just a normal attack. So really strong, and the unique piece not only has more physical and magical armor than say the normal warrior piece, this has 75 points total, whereas the greatsword has 80 points total, but it also has plus 27 piercing resistance as well. So any ranged attack or spear attack from a certain enemy that does piercing damage, that's 27 more damage we're going to be mitigating right there. So add cutting and piercing damage resistance between our boots and this, this, we're already getting some additional resistances on top of that, so really good there. Also increases our parry power, has stamina regeneration, and gives 18% additional damage against flying enemies. And obviously for a warrior, flying enemies can tend to be the most annoying, so having that bonus damage allows you to just take them down that much quicker. We will also be speccing into the grappling hook skills that will allow us to just pull them in quicker, and so we can drop them in pretty much just one hit most of the time. So that is the gloves. I did test the frozen gauntlets because our main weapon that we chose does do ice damage, but unfortunately the secondary buff to elemental damage just wasn't as good as the flat damage for the weapon type itself. I mentioned in my previous hunter video that core damage type buffs for weapon types and or just base melee damage buffs in general are a larger multiplier than a secondary elemental bonus. So even though the 10% ice damage looks nice, you actually don't get as much of a damage boost from it as you would think. So keep that in mind. Moving on to the chest piece, the tried and true Sun Piercer. I've used this on every single build, mainly for the 360 flat health. Very, very tanky when you're wearing this. It also gives 36 stamina, which is very important on a warrior. And then it has a total of 302 resistances, 201 physical, and 101 magical. And then last but not least, for the helmet, we are running the Sun Piercer helmet. Another good physical and magical armor based piece. Gives flat 18% melee critical strike chance for all melee weapons, and we will be mixing and matching between one-handed and shield and a two-handed weapon, so this is good across the board. And flat 15% bonus to all critical strike damage. I did test the Circlet of Lightning. This has a little bit more resistances, especially the plus 53 for shock. However, I tested the damage for maximum output, and the 15% increase to the secondary shock element damage wasn't enough to cover the extra damage that you're getting from the consistent critical strikes. You do get critical strike chance when you're soaked, and all enemies will get soaked with how we're running this build, but the consistency, what I found with the generic melee critical strike and the bonus critical strike damage gives us more burst potential, especially during boss fights and things like that, than the Circle of Lightning was doing. So that is why I went with that, but it is still a very strong option. So that is the armor. Moving on to the rings, best in slot in my opinion. For 99% of the content you're going to be doing is double Ring of the Ancients. For the same reason things like the gloves were good, is just the flat 5% melee damage. Stamina, mana, and health regen is always nice as well. So double Ancient Rings gives you the max DPS possible, unless you're either in the Shroud or going against the Fell Dragon boss, in which case I would switch both of those Ancient Rings out for double Gemini Rings, because they now give 7% extra damage to Fell. So the plus 14 flat damage against any Fell enemy in the Shroud or the Dragon boss fight will be higher than the flat 10% that you're getting from the Ancient Rings, plus the Life Leech is always nice as well. If you find that your maneuverability isn't as good and you're kind of new to the game, you could potentially run one of each and just have that little 7% extra chance for Life Leech, especially with the greatsword, because our one-off hits do so much damage that if this procs on pretty much any hit that we do, it's going to regenerate a ton of health for us. So that is another potential option you can do. You'll just lose a little bit of DPS for more survivability. Moving on to the shield. The only time we're going to be running a shield is if obviously we have our one-handed on it, and we're really only going to be doing that for either health leech reasons or to parry and stun block enemies. So the best shield to run is going to be the Sun Piercer shield, because it has the highest parry power in the game at 321. The two-handed weapons can parry as well. The timing is just a little bit more tricky sometimes, but it is doable, even though in the tooltips in the skill tree it says it only works with the shield. All two-handed weapons have their own parry power rating as well, and the one we're using is still 260 something, I believe, so it's really, really strong. But that is the shield. And then for our ranged weapon, for things like stun arrows on the Fell Dragon boss, etc., or just knocking down some smaller ranged enemies, we're using the Forsaken Bow with the Gem of Currents on it, because that is what our whole build is going to be based around again, is that soak status debuff, and all the soak status will also be reducing the elemental resistances to both shock and ice, so that's why we're taking that. But moving on to the main weapons. The best in slot by far is going to be the Greatsword of Rivalry. I tested this weapon against every single two-handed weapon in the game, both for hammers and axes, and this does the most damage bar none. As long as you spec into the soak status debuff and pick up the cutting and ice bonus skills in the skill tree, this does a insane amount of damage, and it's just an all-around great weapon for everything that we potentially need it for. It's got Merciless on it, so if we parry, it'll give bonus damage for that. It has Vicious on it, so anytime we get a backstab opportunity, especially against boss fights like the Fell Dragon boss, we're going to get a bunch of bonus damage there, which will also get increased by another 30% from skills in the tree, and it's the only other two-handed greatsword that has 3 damage perks on it, and they just happen to be all ice. And obviously with the soak status debuff, all enemies get 30% reduced ice and shock resistances, so that makes this weapon do even more damage as well. I tried this with the gem of cutting or bloodletting, whatever that new red gem is, that gives the bonus cutting damage, and it just wasn't the same output as the gem of currents with the soak status kind of method. You do get little bursts here and there, and you can generate health orbs, but it's only a 5% chance to generate that first orb, and if you don't have multiple enemies around you at any given point to continuously take advantage of that 60% buff that you get after getting that first orb, you really don't notice the effect active that often, whereas with the Gem of Currents, with the little trick that I'm going to be showing you guys, we'll be able to have 100% uptime on that buff every time we go out to fight something, whether it's one enemy or 100 enemies. So that's why this is more consistent, has higher max DPS. It's going to be boosting the damage of our weapon because of those resistances being reduced. So all in all, fantastic option. And it combos with the new Greatsword gauntlets that we have that are specifically for greatswords. Those gauntlets have the highest bonus weapon damage perk of any other piece of armor in the game. So if you want to min-max and get the most damage possible, it kind of pigeonholed us into running a greatsword. We won't be taking the whirlwind attack. It's just not worth it on the greatsword because it only happens after the 4th hit. But there is a combat little trick that I can show you to get swings off a little bit faster, to kind of take advantage of the fact that we're not going to be doing whirlwind anymore. And for specific instances, for things like the hollowed halls, almost every enemy in there is weak to blunt damage, and obviously the Greatsword of Rivalry is cutting damage. So in those one-off instances, what I would recommend is changing your spec a little bit at the altar and just remove like the 2 extra points in piercing that we have and put them into blunt damage instead, and then use something like the Frost Smasher or the Totem Head Mace for your one-hand option, because those are all blunt damage, and will do a bit more against those skeleton type enemies. But for everything else, the two-handed Greatsword of Rivalry is by far the most damage for a two-hander loadout that I found and tested. Moving on to our one-handed option, what we're going to be using with our shield, the main one that I found that worked best for the reason we're using one-handed is going to be the Deathgazer Axe. This has both Vicious for bonus backstab, which will get buffed with our skill tree, and it also has Opportunistic, which gives us 10% increased critical strike chance against soaked enemies, which we're going to be doing at all times because we have a Gem of Currents on there. It has double health leech, so all of our single one-off hits are going to be regenerating health with every hit, and it has a 10% magic shock damage bonus, which is going to combo with the Gem of Currents as well, because enemies are going to get their shock resistance reduced, so a little bit more damage with this as well. So that is the one-handed we're going to be using. Good honorable mentions, if you will, for weapons that I tested that were pretty good, but not as good for certain scenarios. The Guard of the North sword was really good. This critted a lot, but the base damage just wasn't high enough to compete, and it only has 2 damage perks on it instead of 3. So the crits are nice, but the maximum damage output just for consistency wise wasn't there. I tested the Fell Dragon boss from beginning to end with every single one of these weapons to make sure that I was seeing which one had the fastest TTK, and the Greatsword of Rivalry blew them all out of the water, as you'll see from the combat demo. Another one that was pretty good was the Megalodon Greatsword for the same reasons. Good critical strike damage boosts, backstab damage boosts. It does have a little bit of health leech on it, and magic shock damage bonuses, which is obviously good with the Gem of Currents as well, and opportunistic, which is good for soaked debuffs as well. So not a bad option there. But again, 139, the base intrinsic damage of a sword or any weapon in particular makes all the difference. And so it just didn't keep up the pace with the other options we had. Some alternative options, at least for the Fell Dragon boss that I tested. If you specifically want to use one hand, I honestly don't know why you would, because once you see the combat demo, all you need is the Greatsword of Rivalry, and we two-phase the dragon with literally no problem at all. Would be actually the Scavenger Mining Axe. It has double vicious perks, which is really good against the Fell Dragon because you can position for those backstab hits very easily, double piercing damage, and then 10% cleansing, which gives you a flat 10% bonus against all Fell enemies. So in the Shroud and against the Fell Dragon boss, if you specifically want to use a one-handed weapon, this is actually probably the best in slot for that one particular fight. But for everything else, and for what we're really only going to be using our one-handed for anyway, like Health Regen and parrying, the Death Gazer Axe was the best choice. I also tested out the Cursebringer Axe. This is a fan favorite by a lot of people because it has good crit damage, a decent balance of crit chance, has shock damage, which goes well with the Gem of Currents as well, and Health Leech to get back some health, so that's always nice. But unfortunately, for the highest min-maxed DPS we have, we want to use the Greatsword Gauntlets, and this is obviously an axe, so we can technically swap between the Sunpiercer gloves and kind of take advantage of that. It's not going to be as high as the Greatsword of Rivalry, but it's really only going to be viable if you switch your gloves, because you won't be getting any benefit because it's not a Greatsword. So just keep that in mind. So those are all of the weapon options, but just to reiterate, the best in slot for this particular build for 99% of the scenarios is going to be the Greatsword of Rivalry, the Death Gazer Axe, and your Forsaken Bow. For Hallowed Halls specifically, you can do the Frost Smasher and Totem Head Mace, because all enemies are weak to blunt damage. Just swap the piercing perks for blunt perks in your skill tree, and then the rest I wouldn't really recommend using at all, but they are still viable if you just happen to not have found these legendaries yet. So just keep those options in mind. Those were the runner-ups, if you will. So that is the weapons. Moving on to ammunition and consumables. Really, I only take for my bow the stun arrows. I typically only use this for the Fell Dragon boss to stun him quicker. You could just bring a stack of regular arrows for certain flying enemies if they're really far away. But like I mentioned earlier, we are going to be taking that grappling hook ability to pull them in closer, so we should be able to take out most flying enemies with our melee weapon anyway. But the cool new addition is going to be the portable water pump. I know in all my previous build videos, I told you guys that the water balloon was the best option for soaking yourselves, but when I created the warrior build, I decided to give the water pump another test because recently they did a patch that modified the effects of water flow and things like that, and sure enough, they did change how the water pump works, and it can successfully soak you. So just to prove it here, unlike the water balloons where you would have to throw it directly at a wall, like I was mentioning in my hunter build, the only thing you have to do different with the water pump is you just have to aim it a little bit higher. So if you just aim it just right, as you can see, the water ricochets off of whatever object, could be a tree trunk, a ruined wall, some debris, anything like that. And it'll ricochet off and land on you and give you the soak status debuff to start activating that Gem of Currents on your weapon. So this is definitely by far the new, most convenient way of giving yourself that soaked debuff to take advantage of your gem. You don't have to craft water balloons anymore, and you can refill this anytime you want at any world water source, ponds, streams, lakes, little troughs, things like that. You can typically fill this up anywhere, and so it's just an infinite supply of soak status, if you will. It comes in really handy for tools. But moving on to our other consumables, obviously best in slot health and mana potions. I like to take the Drac-Soulward Flask, especially for the Veil Water Basin territory, because almost every enemy you fight is going to be a Drac enemy, so 10% bonus damage there. For anything in the Albanese summits, including the Fell Dragon boss, you're going to want to bring the Pocket Heater to help mitigate some of that hypothermia temperature issues that you can run into. I like to bring the Elixir Potions for any time I'm in the Shroud or going against the Fell Dragon boss, and I typically combo that with the Glimmer Gentian Tea, because both of these give big bonus damages to any Fell type enemy. Take Flasks of the Fell for bonus stamina, always very important on a warrior. And then for the main bread and butter food sources, we have 4 main ones. And then for boss fights in particular, there's going to be one that's a little bit better. It just has a very short duration. So the one that you would swap back and forth would be either the popcorn or the honey baked banana. For 99% of running around, you're going to want to use the honey baked banana, 21 health regeneration and 85 stamina regeneration. But if you're going against a boss, I would recommend running the popcorn. This has 20 stamina regeneration, but an additional 4% to your melee damage. So you want to be able to do as much min-max damage as possible during boss fights, and they typically don't last any more than 4 or 5 minutes anyway. So as long as you pop this right before the boss, it should last the entire duration. So that's why I run that. But anything else, honey baked banana is fine. We're also going to be running the blacked coffee. This got buffed in the latest update. Has flat 30 stamina, but it also has 30 stamina regeneration, which it didn't have before, plus another 6% melee damage, which is always good. Moving on, we have the beef stew. This will give 240 health and 12 health regeneration, as well as 1 frost resistance, which is good for the Albanese Summits territory. There is a better stew that gives a little bit more health, but it doesn't last as long, I believe. And from what I found, we have plenty of health in this build. So having the additional frost resistance, because we have almost no bonus frost resistance with our armor, and just the passive regeneration in case we do get hit, tended to be more consistent for my testing. So that's why I like to run this. Plus, it's a slightly easier one to craft than the better soup. But last but not least, the most important one is going to be the fried rice. This is the go-to best food option for any warrior build. Gives flat 10 stamina for 55 minutes and 21% melee damage for every single type of melee weapon, two-handed, one-handed, you name it. So those are all of the food options and consumables. Moving on, let's go to the skills. So here we go. Warrior, a little bit different than other classes because you're kind of already focusing on survivability early on. So you could start in either the warrior or the tank tree, in my opinion. But we're focusing mainly on two-handed damage. So at first, I'd take the early points in Constitution for more health and kind of pick up some of these tank options here. You got shiny plates, heavy plates, for bonus increased armor for all your armor, and a 10% increase to the amount of damage that each piece of armor can mitigate, followed by Constitution for more health. I also pick up Evasion Attack and Battle Heal. This is huge. Critical strikes with melee weapons can heal you for 5% of your maximum health, so really good heal regen option with this perk. Also take Tower and Warden for 15% magic resistance and 10% physical damage resistance. Point in strength, and point in constitution, followed by Earth Aura. You emit a protective aura that reduces all damage received by 10% for you and all allies within 10 meters. And then last but not least, one of the most important, Thick Skin. You gain 1 point of constitution for each 2 levels of flame. So at max level flame 9, you're getting 4 additional constitution, which is a ton of extra health for this build. Moving on. The next thing you can probably focus on if you're going with two-handed is probably the Barbarian tree. Point in strength followed by heavy-handed, filling up the enemy stun bars. Is increased by 20% when attacking blocking enemies with melee weapons. I also grab Feast, which increases the health from all of our meat options. So in this case, the stew, I believe, by an additional 15%, so more tankiness there. Point in strength, point in constitution, followed by Relentless. Critical strikes with two-handed weapons increases your critical strike chance by 10% on the next hit. So you can see chained critical hits happening pretty frequently. You'll see that in the combat demo as well. I also pick up Breach. Overpower enemies receive 100% increased melee damage for 3 seconds. And then the shockwave ability, trigger a shockwave when you parry an attack or overpower an enemy. This is going to be really good when we're using our one-hander and our shield, because if you can get really good at parrying, that shield has just so much parry power at this stage in the game that you can just instant kill like any enemy in one hit if you get a perfect parry because of the merciless attack. Moving on, point in Constitution for more health, followed by heavy specialization. This allows your two-handed weapons to attack faster, and that includes the greatsword. Barbarian, gain 1 point of strength for every 2 levels of flame. That's the same version type of skill as thick skin, but for strength, so very important. That's 4 additional strength there, so 20% bonus melee damage basically, because you get 5% for every point. And then lastly, Blood Rage. When an enemy is within 10 meters gets killed by a melee weapon, which is pretty much going to be always, you fall into a Blood Rage. And what Blood Rage does is it increases your weapon damage by 20% for 10 seconds. You'll see this happen against the Fell Dragon boss as well in the combat demo. And it's mainly one of the reasons why I'm able to kill him so fast, is I timed the kill on some of the whelplings to give me the Blood Rage buff right before I did the final bit of damage to stun the dragon. And then I went in for 10 seconds and just went ham on him and just did a ton of bonus damage there. But moving back to the warrior tree, we do have some one-handed options that we're going to want to take. So point in Constitution we should already have, followed by Warrior's Path. Melee weapon damage in general is going to be increased by 10%. Another point in Strength, followed by Slasher and Butcher for 30% bonus cutting damage. The 2 primary weapons, besides the Shock element and Ice element, we're going to be using both do cutting damage, so we definitely want to take these. I'm taking Titan's Edge, which gives all great swords just flat out another bonus 10% damage, so that's another reason why great swords have a big bonus compared to other ones in this update, because they just added that. I'm taking Hammer Time only because it's a quicker way to get to Veteran. That'll give 20% bonus to all blunt damage. If you're going to be doing a Hallowed Halls, I'd get rid of the Thrust and Pierce options and put the additional points into Brute and maybe some more Constitution, especially if you're doing a higher difficulty, because those weapons will be blunt-based weapons, not cutting. But moving on, we have Veteran. Melee weapon critical strike chances increased by 10%. This is for all weapon types, not just one-handers, so that's good. Followed by another point in Strength. And then lastly, Swift Blades. This allows you to attack faster with all one-handed swords and axes. And the main primary one-hander that we're using is going to be a one-handed axe. So really good combo there. Moving on to the middle, I do take Merciless Attack because with our shield having such high parry power, if you get good at it, some of the bigger brute type enemies become very easy to take down if you can stun them quickly. So being able to one-shot them after a successful merciless attack is very, very handy. Saves a ton of time on those brute type enemies, and parry power as well. Filling up enemy stun bars with parries is increased by an additional 30%, so that combos with our shield even more, just fills up that stun meter quicker. And then lastly, Opportunity increases the damage multiplier of merciless attacks by another 100%. So it's pretty much a one-hit kill if you get a stun on an enemy and you do a merciless attack. And then we're obviously going to be taking Grounding Hook and Giant Slayer Hook. This will either grapple us towards an enemy if it's larger, or if it's a smaller flying enemy, for example, it'll grapple them and pull them close to us so we can just instantly kill them with our melee weapon and won't have to worry about jumping around all over the place. So really handy perks for a warrior there. But moving on to Athlete, we have Bash and a point in Strength. Your parry will bash an enemy for 20 additional blunt damage, and that bash damage is increased by our Strength attribute. And by the way, we are taking every single possible point of Strength on this skill tree that you can, so that'll get very boosted once we get successful parries. Point in Strength followed by Crash Down Attack. This is amazing for two-handed weapons, and because we're not going to be doing the Whirlwind ability, this is our main bread and butter attack that in my opinion is even better for AoE damage for two-handed weapons, and this will get further boost with the Crash Down Force perk that we're taking, which will make that Crash Down do 20% even more damage. Pick up Double Jump, no brainer, followed by the Point in Strength and Finesse. One-handed melee weapons and daggers have a 20% chance to not lose durability. The only reason we're really taking this is to get to Backstab Mastery, which will give all of the Vicious perk on our weapons and all that extra backstab damage another 30% boost. So really handy there. We're picking up Vigorous Deflection. Successfully parrying an enemy's attack will restore 30 stamina. Always good on a warrior. Followed by Blood Warrior. Defeating an enemy with a sneak attack or a merciless attack will spawn a health orb. This perk is nice and kind of defeats the main purpose why a lot of people use that dark axe there, the main axe that everyone was obsessed with, the Cursebringer axe, because it has a health leech on it. By having this particular perk, if you just parry an enemy with your shield with a one-handed weapon, it has a large chance of spawning a health orb after a merciless kill, so you can regenerate health that way. 2 points in our point in strength and point in constitution will round out the athlete tree. Moving on to the survivor tree. This is where we're gonna invest a little bit into our endurance. We already talked about double jump and crash down, but we also want runner, regular endurance, and wanderlust to make running around cause our stamina to deplete a little bit less, especially on dirt roads and things like that. We're also picking up good metabolism to make those health orbs that we can generate with abilities like Blood Warrior revive 30% of the respected resource instead of just 10. And it also gives a 20% buff to all of our health and mana potions, which is nice. Followed by Sweet Tooth. Stamina regeneration on all sweets is increased by another 50%. Both the banana and our popcorn are considered sweets, so that will make the stamina regen on those two food items even stronger. Follow that up with a point in dexterity. Not a big deal. It'll just give our Forsaken Bow a little bit more damage, but we're ultimately taking that to pick up Dessert Stomach. This is the ability that allows us to take that 4th food slot, so really important perk here. Moving on, the last few points we're going to need are the elemental boosts and our glider boosts. So in the ranger tree, or assassin tree, sorry, pick up the point in dexterity for more bow damage, followed by airborne and updraft. I'm going this way just because it's the cheapest way to get our glider upgrades. That'll make the glider consume 30% less stamina and give us that double drift glide ability. And then last but not least, to make our main-handed two-handed greatsword that is half cutting, half ice damage, do even more damage. We're going to work into the wizard's tree a little bit and pick up the point in spirit, followed by mage apprentice, another point in spirit for more mana, and then Iceman and Sub-Zero for 30% more increased damage on our greatsword. So really good perks here. And then last but not least, we're going to kind of peel off from the evasion tack, the evasion skill in the tank tree, and work our way to arcane deflection and then ultimately blink. Arcane deflection, not really a big deal. Successfully parrying an enemy's attack will restore mana. The main reason we're just taking this is to get to blink. This is really handy in a pinch, especially as a warrior. It replaces the dodge and allows you to reposition a lot faster. So that is the new and improved skill tree. Pretty much everything you see here is good as is. The only thing I would recommend switching is if you're going blunt-based weapons for certain scenarios like the hollowed halls, for example. Swap out just the piercing nodes and pick up the brute blunt nodes and maybe a couple more points in constitution. That's really the only thing you're ever going to have to change. You could also potentially, because you've got, I think it's like 2 points here and 3 points here, so you'd have 5 points total. With those 3 extra points, you might be able to reduce like 1 point in endurance somewhere and pick up Whirlwind Crescendo, because the two-handed blunt weapons can do that whirlwind attack on only 3 hits instead of 4. So that might be a somewhat decent option in that scenario to take this perk. Everything else, I wouldn't bother with it though. But yeah, that's really the only thing you'd have to worry about adjusting. Everything else is good as is. So the only thing left to do after that is just pop all the consumables that we would typically have when we're running out and about, and show you what the final stats are. So let's go ahead and pick up our Vaka buff. We can also pick up the Pause Touch from our doggo over here. This will give 25 bonus health. And then we can go ahead and pop our Drask Potion, because we'll be in the Veilwater Basin, our rice, our stew, our coffee, and for the sake of damage, we'll do the popcorn. We want more stamina, and we also want our buff for the elixir buff against fell enemies. So with all of our buffs active, not including our soaked buff, which would give us even more resistances, our attributes are as follows: 1,711 health, 300 mana, and 524 stamina, which is pretty good. That's multiple bars of stamina. So I've never run into stamina issues, honestly, even as a warrior, unless you're just spam down smashing with a two-handed weapon. That's the only thing that's even remotely gotten it low. Melee damage, 161% modifier, and then 60 for both ranged and magic. For our primary points, we have 19 Constitution, which is a ton of health, 10 Spirit, 9 Endurance, and 22 Strength, which is the max strength that you can get, as well as 10 Dexterity and 8 Intelligence. For stamina regeneration, we're at 322, so even if you do get low, you're going to be regenerating your stamina insanely quick because of the food options we're taking, and the delay because of our Drakian boots is super fast. But moving on to damage. Critical damage is 165%. We also have a flat 5% critical chance with all of our weapons, with additional 28% for all melee. So that is what, 33 total crit chance, which isn't bad. That will be increased to over 40 once we get the soak status debuff applied to us. So that isn't accurately reflected once we soak ourselves and use the Gem of Currents. Resistances are going to get down, and our critical strike is going to increase on all the weapons that we have opportunistic on. So that's going to be a little bit higher there. Sneak attack damage, 1,000. Merciless attack damage, 600% because of all the perks we have. If you get some good quality stuns off with your parries, you're basically going to one-shot any enemy once you get that merciless attack popping up. 40% bonus backstab damage. That works really well, especially with our main weapon, because that has Vicious on it. We get plus 18% bonus damage against all flying enemies, 6% against Drak because of our potion, and then 20% against Fel and Scavengers because of the Vakal buff and our elixir. This will potentially be, 35 if we use the Gentian Tea instead of the popcorn, because that gives 15% more Fel damage as well for a food option. We have 31 bonus damage for greatswords and 30 bonus damage for the ice element, which covers our main primary weapon completely. But moving on to protection, this is the big one. We have 509 physical armor resistance, which for a warrior is a little bit more important because we're going to be in close combat most of the time, as well as 311 magical. But what's cool is because of our Drakian boots and the one-off unique item armor choices we're picking, we get 21 additional points of cutting and 27 of piercing damage mitigation and 21 fire damage mitigation. So really, really good secondary resistances as well. That makes you a super tank, and it just shaves off a ton of those damage for every hit that you take. Those 21, 27, 21 little bits of damage here and there really add up quick. So super tanky and an all-around great build for the warrior. The only thing I guess I left to do now is show you guys the combat demo. I will say it was the fastest TT kill of any of the builds that I made for this update. We easily two-phased the dragon, which I was not expecting, and I think I get like over an 8,000 crit with just one swing at one point that you guys will see in the video as well. So be sure to stick around for that. Well, yeah, with that being said, if you guys enjoyed it, if you found it informative, be sure to smash that like button, comment down below. I appreciate all of your guys' feedback. Also, if you want to keep up to date with my future content, consider subscribing and turn on that notification bell. And last but not least, if you want to join a killer community of like-minded gamers, feel free to check the links down in the description and join us on the Discord. We've got over 1,000 members in there now, many of which are playing Enshrouded. So hopefully you jump in and we see you guys around here soon. I will also be posting the build cheat sheet as the top line of the description. So feel free to open that up and bookmark it to reference at your leisure. It'll beat having to rewatch this video a million times. So hopefully that helps you guys out too. But yeah, other than that, I hope everyone has a great day. I hope everyone has a happy holidays, and we'll see you all in the next one.